see if I can.
Okay. We are on page 30.
When are we going to finish up?
I think we have 2 more sessions total.
This
and Wednesday, and maybe by Sunday we're good, or maybe by Wednesday. We need to plan the siyum, and then we're going to start immediately. The next session will be next Gemara. Okay, let's get started. Page Lamed Amud Aleph. That's 30A3 if you're following in the art scroll. Okay, the Mishnah says, "Lo yochal basar velo yishte yain." A person should not eat meat and you should not drink wine. We're talking about with regards to the time of mourning of Tisha B'Av. Okay, and the Shavua Shechalbo and the 9 days. So now the Braita is now going to qualify what we just understood. Tana, aval ochel hu basar maliach v'shotei yain migito. However, you're allowed in that meal, that is the final meal that you're going to have before the fast, you're allowed to have super salted meat and wine which is young. Yain Megito is wine which has not had any time to age. So straight off the wine press, it's called Yain Megito. It doesn't taste good. Basar Maliach ad kama, the Gemara says, well, okay, how long does it have to sit in order for it to be considered Basar Maliach, that it gets it out of the rule of being considered Basar? The Gemara answers, Amar Rav Chinna bar Kana mishmei Shmuel. Rav Chinna bar Kana said in the name of Shmuel, Kozman shehu kishilamim. So long as it's compared to shilamim, then it's considered regular meat, right? And then you would not be allowed to eat it. And after that point, it's already considered salted, and you no longer have that isur. So what does it mean? What does it mean as long as it's like a shilamim? So there's a halacha. Each korban has a amount of time that a person eats it before it's considered it's past its time. So, like if you ever read in the korbanot in the morning, it says ne'echal le'layla v'yom, ne'echal l'shnei yamim v'layla echad. You eat it for 2 days and 1 night. You eat it for 1 night and 1 day. Each korban has a different amount of time that you're allowed to eat the meat from the korban, whether you or the kohanim. After that point, where it's gone beyond that point, it's considered notar, and then it needs to be burnt. It's not allowed to be used. So how long is shilamim? So as we said, shilamim is ne'echal for shnei yamim v'layla echad, for 2 days and 1 night. So long as it's past that amount of time, sitting in salt 2 days and 1 night, that salting process has now removed the halacha of meat from it, and now it's considered this new thing called basar maliach. What about yain megitu? So we said it comes off the press. How long off the press is off the press? Okay, Gemara answers, so long as the process of fermentation is not done, so it's still going through the process of fermentation from the wine press. It's still in the process of a fresh wine. Aging wine is different than fermenting wine. Okay. So long as it's still fermenting, Toses also usually means bubbling. The process of fermentation also causes the wine to bubble as well. The Braita continues and explains more about this idea of basar and yain, which is not basar and yain. Tana, yain Toses en bo mishum gilui. Yain, wine that's fermenting, there's no halacha that it's if you leave it open overnight that it can't be used. The kamat sisato, how long does this part of the process take? The Gemara answers, Shilosha yamim gimel yamim, 3 days. After 3 days, this initial stage is already done. Okay? Now, why is it saying it that it's big gilui? What is revealed or uncovered wine? What does that have to do with anything? We have a law that says that uncovered liquids, if a person leaves liquids uncovered overnight, you're not allowed to drink from it in the morning. This halacha originated in an element of sakana, whether it was because of the fact that they had snakes at the time that were prevalent everywhere. So if there was an open liquid container, then that could kind of draw something which is unsafe inside of it. Other opinion is that it relates to the ruchot, the spirits that they used to have at that time. At night, some ruach ra'ah, etc., etc., you would not be allowed to have it, okay? But that is a law that applies to the 9 liquids that are classified as the tisha mashkin, the 9 liquids. Yain, wine, is one of them. But wine, which is undergoing its fermentation process, if it was grape juice, it would also be a problem. Now that it shifts from grape juice to wine, the period in between, it's neither one nor the other. So therefore, it does not have the laws of a revealed one of the 9 liquids. So the same way that we find that it's exempt from those laws, because it doesn't have the halacha of wine, so too it would also be exempt from this law because it does not have the halacha of wine, and therefore it would not be forbidden to drink during the Seudah HaMafseket. The Gemara now expresses a continuation of this Seudah HaMafseket and how a person should behave. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav. Kach haya minhago shel Rabbi Yehuda b'Rabbi Elai. This was the minhag, this was the practice of Rabbi Yehuda bar Elai. Erev Tisha B'Av mevi'in lo pat chareva b'melach. In the afternoon, they would bring him this pat chareva, it was completely like dehydrated. I guess today we would call it crostini or toast, right? They would bring him this dry bread and it had salt with it. The Yoshev, and he would sit ben tanu l'kiraim, in between the oven and the stove. Now they used to have different types of ovens. Today we have ovens that function with different settings. But they used to have a tanur and a kiraim, which did different things, and they used to cook different things on the tanur and on the kiraim, on the oven and on the stove. Okay, one usually was used for baking, one was used usually for cooking. The tanur was something you put something in. Kiraim was something usually that you put something on. Okay, but he sits between these two areas. Remember the soot that's coming out, the smoke that's coming out. It's not a nice place to be sitting. He would sit in a place that was uncomfortable. The ochel, and he would eat the dry bread and the water that they brought him, and salt. V'shotea alea kiton shel mayim, and he would drink with this dried out bread with salt. He would drink with it a pitcher of water. V'domek kemi shemeto mutar lefanav, and he looked like someone that had someone just pass away. He was sitting shiva, and that's why he was sitting in this place to express his sorrow. And therefore also the food that he was eating was the food that was the least luxurious food that he could possibly be eating. Gemara continues and says, okay, Tanan Hatam. We learned over there in the Mishnah. Now, just to be clear, okay, this practice that we just said over in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, B'Rabbi Elai, it does not say that this Seudah was the Seudat HaMafseket, right? It just says Erev Tisha B'Av. So I don't know why the Gemara expresses or understands that this is how he behaved. Now, if you want to say to me that, okay, Rabbi Yehuda bar Elai is telling us how we should behave during the final Seudah HaMafseket, this law is not a law that we follow anyway during the Seudah HaMafseket, right? We hold that you're allowed to eat other things. You just can't eat 2 dishes that are cooked, like we said earlier, right? You can't have wine and meat during that Seudah. But no one says that it has to be dried out bread and water with salt. No one says that, right? The answer is that means that Rabbi Yehuda bar Elai was acting in a way which was above and beyond because of his level. He was being machmir. But once we say that Rabbi Yehuda bar Elai was being machmir, we also don't know if there was a Seudah HaMafseket. Maybe he was machmir the whole day. It all says it's Erev Tisha B'Av. So I'm not sure how the Gemara knows, or if the Gemara knows, whether or not that was specifically a Seudat HaMafseket. Unless the Gemara held that even if he was machmir, no one would have gone that far on the day. Again, I find that hard to believe. Remember, they were so close to the Churban. Yehuda bar Elai is one of the Tanaim. Gemara continues. Tanan Hatam. We learned in the Mishnah over there. Let's say you have a place where everybody goes to work on Shabbat. We're just talking about customs of people not working on days. But let's say you lived in a place where everyone works on Shabbat. Osin, you're allowed to go to work. A place where everyone takes off on Shabbat, you're not allowed to do the work. You're not allowed to work. But wherever you go, the Talmidei Chachamim, the Torah scholars, betelim, they must not go to work. They have to sit and mourn on Shabbat. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel says, now I just want to show you something that I thought was interesting. Rashi says, where is it here? Okay, here. I'll get to it. I'll show it to you in a second when the Gemara comes to those words. Ready? So the Gemara says that the Talmidei Chachamim for sure need to sit idle and mourn. Rabbi Shlomo Gamliel omer, "Leolam yaseh kol adam atzmo ketalmid chacham." You know what? For this, on this day, you're all Talmidei Chachamim. Okay? Everybody should sit home. Everybody should not go to work. It's not the right day to be working. Tanya Nami Hachi, we also learned exactly like this in the Braita. A person should make himself a ketamid chacham in order that he should be able to go through the inuyim of the day of Tisha B'Av. He shouldn't distract himself with the work that he's got to do on that day. He should either consider himself a tamid chacham for this day and go and mourn. I always loved this because I always thought to myself whenever I learned this Gemara that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says today everyone's a tamid chacham. You know why you could say that?
Why?
Because on Tisha B'Av we just learned you're not allowed to learn Torah. So what difference is there between you and the tamid chacham? So at the very least today, act like a tamid chacham because no one's going to call you out.
I'm wondering where the basis for it was.
Yeah.
Don't work.
On the simple level, it's just a fancy way of saying non-talmidei chachamim also have to not stay idle and mourn. But why did he word it that way? So I think maybe perhaps this is the basis of that concept.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
what's the basis when you see in the notes that it says that Mishnah Berurah explains that he will gain no benefit from money earned on working on Tisha B'Av?
Well, we're going to get there in 1 second.
Oh, okay.
Okay, all right. Now, the Gemara says, Tanya Idach. We learned in another Braita. 1 second here. One second, hold on, give me 1 second. Tanya Idach. Okay, we did that one. We did that first. Tanya Idach. We learned in another place. Okay. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel omer, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel told, "Kol ha'ochel v'shoteh b'Tisha B'Av, you eat and drink on Tisha B'Av, kilo ochel v'shoteh b'Yom HaKippurim." It's like you ate and drank on Yom Kippur. Wow, huh? Isur karet. Rabbi Kiva Omer, now obviously it does not mean that a person has Isur karet for eating, but he's saying the stringency of not eating on Tisha B'Av, that's how strict it needs to be taken. All right? The Gemara says, Kiva Omer, Kiva says, Kol ha'oseh melacha b'Tisha B'Av, eno ro'eh siman beracha le'olam. He does not see siman beracha forever. Okay? So you ask, where does the Mishnah Berurah get that law from? Right here.
Right, but what's the basis of saying that?
Rabbi Akiva says, "Eno siman beracha leolam." Now look at Rashi, because I remember reading Rabbi Akiva and I was like, "Holy cow!" And then I see Rashi, and Rashi kind of
from that money, not from
Rashi says, "Me'oto melacha,"
yeah.
from that work. That's not what the Gemara seems to be saying.
No, it's saying forever.
No, Rashi says forever from that money.
Oh, from just
Right.
that specific.
Yes, I made $500. Now I invested it. Nothing good's going to happen.
Could you read it forever because of that money?
So that's the literal interpretation.
Right.
Eno siman beracha leolam. It doesn't say me'otakes. You need Rashi to come and tell you me'otak melacha.
These guys are
Sorry?
these guys are tough.
Who, Rabbi Akiva?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Shimon ben Gamliel, same thing.
Yeah, what, of Yom Kippurim.
Yeah, if you eat or drink, it's like you didn't fast on Yom Kippur.
Well, we'll see in a minute exactly what the reason for that is, okay? Now, just to be clear, when Rabbi Akiva says this, right, Rabbi Akiva is not telling you only about a place where people don't work. Because in a place where people don't work, we already saw in the Braita prior that you're not allowed to work. Here, Rabbi Akiva is saying, even in a place where you're allowed to work,
No
still in Orei Siman Beracha. So you're allowed to do it, but pointless. You may as well stay home. Okay?
But what I'm trying to say is, like, where do you get that from? That there's no beracha in that parnasah?
Well, we're gonna come to it. Like I said, we're gonna come to it. Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. I'm gonna bring it to you in the version of a kal vachomer. Okay, all right. But you have to see Rashi in order to get it. I want to just finish out this braita. V'chachamim omrim, kol ha'oseh melacha b'Tisha B'Av. Anyone that works on Tisha B'Av, eno mitabel al Yerushalayim, eno ro'eh b'simchata. In the end, he does not witness the joy. We repeat this every year, Tisha B'Av. Eno ro'eh b'simchata. Shneimar, like the pasuk says, Simchot Yerushalayim Giduba, right? Find happiness in Yerushalayim and rejoice with it. Kol ohaveh, all those who love it. Sisu itam masos, rejoice. It's rejoicing. Kol ha'mitabelim aleh, all those that were mitabel for her. Mikan amru. From here we learn. Kol ha'mitabel Yerushalayim zochim v'ro'eh b'simchatam. If you're mitabel Yerushalayim, you merit in the end of time to be able to see and rejoice in its simcha. And if a person is not mitabel Yerushalayim, in the end he does not see its simcha. Tanya nami hachi. Okay? We learned in a braita. Kol ha'ochel b'sar v'shotei yayin b'Tisha b'Av, alav ha'katuv omer, anyone who eats meat, drinks wine, Tisha b'Av, the pasuk on him it says, v'atihi avonotam al atzmotam. The sins, their averot, are al atzmotam, on their bones. Instead, that means it means that even after your flesh and your everything withers away, it's there. It's like burned into the bones of the person. Normally we talk about eating kosher. We say kosher is such an important mitzvah because it's the only mitzvah where what you ate becomes part of you. Here we're saying it becomes so much a part of you that even after the basar and the thing, why is it important to say that goes to your bones?
Because then when you're buried, it stays with you.
So we just said kol ha'mitabel Yerushalayim and ro'eh b'simchata. Anyone who's not lo ro'eh b'simchata. How do you know? How is that left?
No tchiat emetim.
Even tchiat. It doesn't say no tchiat emetim, but it says en ro'eh b'simchata. So maybe he misses out on the entire experience of the rebuilding.
Right.
I don't know if the person. I don't know how we know that it goes that far. Because it says eno ro'eh b'simchata. Now, there's one way of understanding eno ro'eh b'simchata means that the person doesn't see at all simchata, at all tchiat emetim. But I have a problem with that understanding. Okay? And I'll explain to you why in just a second. Where are we here?
Said.
No, I know where we are. I'm just saying, I wanted to find, there's something over here, it says eno ro'eh b'simchata.
I don't see him. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Where is it here?
Jonah, I'm sorry about your grandmother.
Thank you.
Great woman.
Okay, so there's one opinion that expresses that this means, like we said, that there's not going to be tchiat emetim. But I find that difficult to see in the pshat of the Gemara. I think that there's mefarshim that hold that way. And ironically, it's not actually from this pasuk. Because from this pasuk, you would not be able to draw that conclusion. Let me explain. Would you say that the idea of tchiat emetim is called the simcha of Yerushalayim? No, those are two separate things. Happens to be that they're linked, and they're in many ways inextricably linked.
By time.
In time, in the revelation. And now the problem is, it might be a practical problem, that the eternal nature of Yerushalayim being rebuilt is a moment of its simcha, and what's it called? And therefore, you can't be present for that.
Defining them by moment.
Sorry?
Because it's being defined by a moment, it can't be eternal.
It doesn't sound to me that this is tchiat emetim. So the Ritva actually brings it from further psukim. But I think that if the Gemara felt that on a pshat level, the Gemara should have expressed that specifically. The Gemara doesn't shy away from saying, that a person doesn't have tchiat emetim. Not only that, the Gemara in Chelek tells us certain things that stop a person from ever receiving tchiat emetim. It's the last perek in Sanhedrin. Fascinating perek of Gemara, very, very deep. Okay, very, very interesting. One day we need to learn. That perek together. Very, very deep stuff. Okay, but in the Gemara says there's certain things that makes a person not rise during tchiat emetim. It doesn't list a person who was not mitabel al Yerushalayim. Now, let's be clear, okay? Even though we have one braita and we read 1, 2, 3, 4, right? 4 different statements, right? It's not clear that all the statements are linked. Let me explain what I mean. So, in other words, on the first pasuk, it says, if a person is mitabel Yushalayim and zocher ro'eh b'simchata. If he was not mitabel Yushalayim, ena zocher ro'eh b'simchata. The last opinion is not talking about a person who was not mitabel Yushalayim. It's talking about a person who goes further than just not being mitabel, and he eats meat and drinks wine. He's going, so to speak, spit on the grave level, where he's celebratory, behavior practices. So on that, the last opinion is saying that the sin is engraved on their bones. Okay, but it could be that on the other ones, the person doesn't experience the beginning. On the final one, which is eating meat and drinking wine on the holiday on Shavuot, there you lose out on Tchiyat HaMetim as well. And there the pasuk, the Mishnah does not bring Eno Ro'eh Simchata. There it says that the Avon is inscribed on your bones. So there it actually uses a terminology and a description which relates to the revivification of a person's bone status to human, to being reconstituted in the time of Tchiyat HaMetim. So to say Eno Ro'eh B'Simchata is a description of not getting up in La'atid Lavo is maybe not the pshat, simple pshat level, but to say it on the final element of the Gemara, of a person eats meat and drinks wine, there perhaps it's more pshat in the Gemara because it talks about the thing being engraved on the bones. And for what purpose would that be other than for a time when those bones would need to be addressed?
Why isn't that just a metaphor for being really, really bad? Why are you taking it literally?
Because there's a lot of ways to give metaphors that don't involve specifically descriptive terminology that relates to Tchiyat HaMetim. That's why.
But it doesn't
Now,
say Tchiyat HaMetim. It says
But maybe
bones.
So the Ritva actually brings another pasuk later on in the chapter. So he's not only relying on this, but what I'm saying is that the Ritva's opinion could fit with the words of the Gemara, and we don't have a question where it's saying something other than Tchiyat HaMetim. Eno Ro'eh B'Simchata seems to me to be saying something other than Tchiyat HaMetim. Something is being written on your bones doesn't seem to me to be saying something other than Tchiyat HaMetim. But you understand, Morris, the difference between what I just said?
Yes.
So it's not a positive proof, but it doesn't have something standing against it being the pshat level. Yes.
Also, we're talking about Tisha B'Av, which is about the Churban, about the revival of the temple. So it would not be an appropriate analogy or metaphor, right, when it's actually literally talking about the time when we're talking about the destruction of the temple. It seems like.
So it's interesting. Again, is Tchiyat HaMetim and the rebuilding of the temple, I know that they're inextricably linked, but are they the same thing?
To me, it doesn't seem like they're the same thing. They just happen at the same time.
Well, it's definitely more than that. Like we say,
linked.
Shibaneh Beit HaMikdash B'Hirav Yameinu, Hashem should send Mashiach and rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. They're always mentioned in the same breath. They're associated together. V'sham na'avodcha b'yirah. It also represents the unification of heaven and earth, of spirituality and physicality, which the Beit HaMikdash is, which is why the Beit HaMikdash is called tzavar, the neck of a person, right? Kimigdal tzavarech, the pasuk says in Shir Hashirim, right? But at the same time, I could argue that it's one is Yerushalayim and the Beit HaMikdash, and one is Tchiyat HaMetim. And if I did all the mitzvot in the Torah, and the only thing I didn't do was be mitavel, I'm not talking about where I spit on the grave, where I ate meat, drank wine. I'm just talking about where I didn't, I didn't eat, I didn't do anything, I didn't work, I just didn't physically go out and be mitabel. Right. So here it says, Eno zocher v'ro'eh b'simchata. So we would. I don't know that we would say that the person loses their opportunity for Tchiyat HaMetim there as well. Okay, let's move on. Oh, just one last piece. There's a famous mashal from the Dubna Magid on this. The Dubna Magid brings. He says, "Kol hamitabel Yerushalayim zocher b'simchata." He says that you have a person, a businessman who goes off on a business trip, far off on a ship to be able to go procure goods to be able to sell back at home. Anyway, he word comes back to the people. Unfortunately, Hazit, the guy drowned. Everyone's losing their minds. Okay, the family falls into deep shock. They can't believe it. The mothers, they're like in denial. The kids are, they haven't taken a bath in 3 weeks. It's just horrible. The friends are, are just shattered. The community is maybe moved, but there's levels, You got the community, acquaintances, businesses. I can't believe it. Yesterday he was here, Then the next level is the friends that are, deeply mourning. They're tearing up. Then there's the families. Devastation's complete. Says a Dubna Magid. A few days later, the guy actually rocks up. Turns out it's a different boat. Right? So everybody rejoices, but think of the happiness of the family. Now think of the happiness of the friends. Right? Now think of the happiness of the community members. Now think of someone in the community that never knew him, never met him, never ever. It didn't register that he died.
Yeah.
It didn't register that he came back. In the example of the Dubna Magid, the idea of Kol HaMitabel Yerushalayim Zocheh V'ro'eh B'Simchata doesn't mean that you're not present. You're present, but it means nothing. You don't experience the simcha because you didn't experience the sadness. So even more so, this illustrates to me that in the first part of the Mishnah, the example of the Dubna Magid would be completely incorrect if the guy's not there at all. Right? And you should know, the most famous thing about the Dubna Magid is the exactitude that he used when he crafted his Mishalim, that his Mishalim should be exactly the same as the Nimshah. If the Ritva applies to this, then...
Doesn't it say the same about Olam Haba? There's no, heaven and hell. It's just that you're able to enjoy it because you're connected to it versus not actually being connected to it?
I wouldn't say there's no heaven and hell. I would say that is part of the experience, or lack thereof.
The pain is not being able to enjoy it because you're stagnant, right?
Correct. But again, I would not say that there is no heaven and hell, but that perhaps that is a part of what makes heaven heaven and what makes hell hell. Yeah? Okay? But yes, it is true that a person could be experiencing hell in heaven, or vice versa, potentially, according to Rav Tzadok. Okay, let's move on. Oh, so sorry. I said we were going to address this. I wanted to just point out now that we finished this Braita, okay? Let's look at the 4 stages of the Braita. What was the first element of the Braita? It was Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. What did Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel teach us?
About
First
wine.
statement.
About wine?
What does he say? Look back. The first statement in this Braita. Anyone who eats or drinks on the 9th of Av, ki'ilu,
Let's see, he ate on Yom Kippur.
ate or drank on Yom Kippur. Then the next one is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva says if you go to work,
Then no profits.
what's the next idea? If you did not, you're not mourn over Jerusalem, you're not going to be able to experience the happiness. And if you ate meat and you drank wine on Shab Av, it's going to go to your bones. So we find different expressions of these Tanaim here that are communicating to us that this day and the actions that we do on this day have real ramifications. So in other words, don't think that there's just this idea that you have to, you have to be mitabel. If you didn't do it, so you didn't do it. If you didn't do what you were supposed to do. Shimon ben Gamliel is like, no, it's like you didn't fast on Yom Kippur. That means that the magnitude of not fasting on this day, of not joining in the Avelut, is such a slap in the face of God's suffering that you not participating in it is dire, and the results of it will be dire. Rabbi Akiva comes and says, you have to understand, anything you do on this day which is not Avelut, there's no beracha to it. It doesn't have a life force. Okay? Chachamim, what they're communicating to us is how deep down the rabbit hole, in terms of sadness, in terms of mourning, Tisha B'Av is supposed to be. Why did I share that with you? Because now I want to go back to one of the first things we learned in the Gemara about a week ago. The Gemara said that, quote on the Mishnah, Mishnichnas Av, once Av enters in, Mima'atim b'simcha. We practice, we have simcha, we lessen it, consciously, we lessen the simcha that we have. And if you remember, the Gemara gave a very specific halachic expression of this mima'atim b'simcha. Do you remember the halachic expression? What was the halachic expression?
Shrinking.
No, halachic one. Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa says on Chaftet Amud Bet. Hilkach, therefore, Bar Yisrael Itle Dina Behade Nachri, a Jew that has a court case with someone who's not Jewish, Lishtamet Mineh Be'av. Scooch out of it. Don't have it in Av. V'limtzi nafshe be'adar, and figure out how to have your court case in Adar, right? Debari mazale, because in Adar your mazal is strong, healthy. What does that mean? Your mazal is in Av, weak. If your mazal is weak in Av, in the entire month of Av, that you're going to lose the court case, so you have bad mazal. So obviously, in the 9 days, the month of, it's bad. Even after, bad. 9 days is going to be worse than the rest of the month of Av, but after Av, right?
Why do we work at all if there's no mazal at that time?
Stana, okay? Then we have the week of Tisha B'Av. Now, if your mazal is bad in Av, the whole month, even the back end, right, of Av is bad. Front load, 9 days, worse. Week of, very bad. Could you begin to imagine the day of Tisha B'Av? That's the source of this idea. Eno ro'eh siman beracha le'olam. So if the whole month is eno ro'eh siman beracha, imagine now, times that by the 9 days, times that by the week of, times that by the day of. Eno ro'eh siman beracha. It's stripped completely of any positive mazal, healthy mazal, for something to move forward, for something to grow, for something to... In fact, it's not just a lack of positive mazal, it's negative mazal. It's destructive mazal. Let me add to that. The Gemara says on the day, what happened on the day of Tisha B'Av? We know that the Jewish people cried on, what's it called? On the border of Eretz Israel. Remember that? They're right outside of Israel, and they're crying about going in. And God says, you cried for no reason. I'm going to give you a reason to cry. This day will always be reserved for puranut, for punishment. And that's why the Mishnah told us already 5 things that happened on the day of Tisha B'Av. You remember that? Right? It gave us a whole list. The Beit HaMikdash, the Batei HaMikdash were destroyed on Tisha B'Av. All the Harugei Betar, Tisha B'Av. This, that, Tisha B'Av. That means that if there's a day for punishment, it's that day. That means that if you're doing business and expecting that to have not just a sign of beracha or even stagnant, it's negative beracha. It's klala that comes from benefit that comes to a person on that day. Eno ro'eh siman beracha to me would seem like perhaps a happy overstatement. Right. Okay. Stanley.
I'm checking something.
Okay. Let's continue. The Mishnah says as follows. Rabbi Yehuda mechayed b'chviyat hamita. Rabbi Yehuda held that a person not only to have these things that we mentioned in the Mishnah, but they would need to turn over all the beds in the house. The Chachamim did not agree to this concept. What's this idea of kfiyat hamita, of turning the bed over? It's actually quite interesting. Now, today, where we are, your mattress on one side, a mattress on the other side, same thing. At least, there's not all mattresses actually are like that, right? There actually was a whole thing about turning mattresses over every 6 months. It's this. They've already phased that out. Now they build mattresses that are only supposed to stay on one side. But they did not have a mattress. It was the same on one side and on the other side. They had a straw mattress. So they put straw out. On the bottom side of the straw, remember the straw was woven so that you'd be able to lie on it. What's the bottom side of your mattress?
Now?
The part, no, of a straw mattress. It's all the ends of the straw that sticks out. So Rabbi Yehuda was saying, not just turn over the mattress like some sort of weird... Yeah, put yourself in a situation, not just where you're not comfortable, but where you're uncomfortable.
The mourners used to do that, didn't they?
It's part of the same concept, okay? The Braita continues. Tanya. Amru lo Rabbi Yehuda. They said over to Rabbi Yehuda, Lidvarecha, according to what you're saying, that you have to act like a avel and turn the bed over. Ubarot umenikot mate alehem. What would be the halakha for someone who's an ubarot, they're pregnant, or menikot, they just gave birth but they're nursing, right? The day for someone like that, you're not able to sleep on the ground. Amar lahem, he said, Af ani lo amarti ele biachol. What are you asking me? Of course, they can't, so they don't. All right? Now, one second here. You see, in the Gemara, it seems clear. Rashi says, they can't sleep on the karka. Why can't they sleep on the overturned bed? It seems like the way they're learning is when they turn over their bed, they don't sleep on the bed at all. They sleep on the floor. So it's even worse, maybe, than sleeping on the backside of a straw mattress. Okay, and that obviously was not a possibility for the ubarot or minikot. But however, to turn the bed over would mean to not use it bichlal, and that would not be possible for those that were pregnant or nursing. And Rabbi Yehuda said, you're right. So, I also meant only a person that can do this. And by the way, from this line, we're going to learn the actual concept in halacha, and we'll come back to it in just 1 second. What does it mean? Rabbi Yehuda says, Af ani, I'm also talking lo amarti ela biachol, by someone that can. Tanya nami hachi, moder Rabbi Yehuda lechachamim sheni yachol. I'll bring a proof that this is the case. Rabbi Yehuda said to the Chachamim in the Braita, I agree b'sheni yachol that they don't have an obligation to do kriyat mitat, to turn over their beds and to sleep on the floor. Umodim Chachamim le Rabbi Yehuda v'yachol. But this Braita now adds a whole other dimension, and the Chachamim agree with Rabbi Yehuda that when you can, then you must. Okay, that we did not really see in the prior Braita. All we saw that Rabbi Yehuda was arguing with them only in one case when they can, not when in the other case where they can't. My binayu, if that's the case, if Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the Chachamim in Eno Yachol, and the Chachamim agree with Rabbi Yehuda in Yachol, then they're saying the same thing. There's nobody left. Answers the Gemara, Ika binayu sha'ar mitot. The difference between them is, what about all the other beds? So let's say someone is Eno Yachol. They can't sleep on the floor. Okay, so I'm not turning over my bed because I got to sleep somewhere and I can't sleep on the floor. I'm a nursing or a pregnant woman. What about the rest of the beds in the house? This was an expression of mourning. Okay, so things were upside down that should have been right side up. I think maybe that's an expression of the idea that we are told that when the souls go up to heaven, the rabbi comes back and he tells his student, Olam hafuch ra'iti. I saw an upside down world. Elyonim lemala, elyonim lemata, tachtonim lemala. Those that are up top down here are down below up there, and those who are down below down here are up on top above. So the mattress being turned over is an expression as well of mourning, and the fact that this person has gone to an upside down place where everything is the opposite of this world. So that would be the difference between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Kidetanya, the Braita says, when they said to turn over the bed, not only yours, you turn over all the beds in the house. Okay? Amar Rava taught, we hold, according to the Taanit, our Mishnah, velo hodu lo chachamim, the Chachamim did not agree kol ikar with Rabbi Yehuda at all. So if you remember, the first Braita I said, it doesn't say that the Chachamim ever agreed with Rabbi Yehuda. All it says, Rabbi Yehuda did not disagree with them when it came to a situation of Eno Yachol. Rabbi Yehuda just said, when you can, sleep on the ground. And the Chachamim, it doesn't say in that Braita that they argued. Rava says, I'm not getting involved in their machloket. All I'm telling you is that the first Braita that does not state that the Chachamim agreed to anything that Rabbi Yehuda said, that's the halacha follows according to that opinion. Okay?
Can you repeat that? I'm not following.
Okay, so if you remember, we had the first Braita said, Rabbi Yehuda says, turn over the bed, and the Chachamim did not agree.
Right.
Okay. What do we follow after that? The next thing says, Rabbi Yehuda, how could you say what you say? What about ubarot and minikot? What about the pregnant and the nursing? Rabbi Yehuda said, what are we talking about? Of course I agree. Eno yachol, that they don't have to do it. Right?
Yeah.
Third Braita says, Chachamim, Rabbi Yehuda says, I agree to you with Eno Yachol, and the Chachamim agreed to him in Yachol. Ask the Gemara, then they're the same. Ask the Gemara, I'll find a way, but they're not the same. Because there's an opinion that says when you turn over the beds, you have to turn over all the beds, not just the ones that you're sleeping in. So the Chachamim would hold that. What's the difference between Chachamim that say that we agree in a situation of Yachol and we don't agree in a situation of En Yachol, and Rabbi Yehuda, who agrees in a situation of Eno Yachol, doesn't agree in a situation of Yachol. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, in a situation of Eno Yachol, what would you do? Sorry, if Yachol,
They turn over
in a situation of
all the beds. He said turn over all the
Yachol,
beds.
you would sleep in the bed. In a situation of Eno Yachol, in a situation of Yachol, you would sleep, on the floor. Situation of Eno Yachol, what would you do? You would sleep in the bed. Okay? Chachamim agree that a person who's Yachol, what does he do? He sleeps on the floor. Okay, according to that third Braita. And his Eno Yachol sleeps on the ground. But then they hold the same thing. The answer is no, they don't hold the same thing. Why? Because if Rabbi Yehuda holds that you have Kfiyat HaMitah and the Chachamim agreed with him in Yachol, that means in a situation of Eno Yachol, they didn't agree with him. That means that the rest of the beds in the house, they don't turn over. Rabbi Yehuda says, when I said Eno Yachol, that he doesn't have to sleep in it, it's just he doesn't have to sleep in it. But the halakha still is Kofin et HaMitah. So the difference would be, if the Chachamim agreed with Rabbi Yehuda in Yachol, then they would turn over his bed, and he would sleep on the floor, and all the other beds in the house. But they did not agree Eno Yachol, which would mean that he doesn't sleep in it, and none of the beds turn over. Okay? So that would be the difference there. Comes along Rava, and Rava says, I see that you have all these braitas that say different things about the Chachamim, but we're going to follow our opinion, our braita, where the braita says that the Chachamim argued point blank on Rabbi Yehuda, which means that they argued in every scenario. Okay? So this whole thing that we just saw, he says the halakha does not follow those braitot. Sorry?
Out the window.
And that would mean that even in a case of Yachol,
Sleep on the bed.
sleep on the bed. Okay? Now if you threw out those Tanyas, right? If you threw out those Tanyas, because we're not following them, you know what else would seemingly get thrown out the window? Rabbi Yehuda's concession.
Well, all of it would be thrown out.
In other words, if we're not following, we don't hold that the halakha is like that braita. So then maybe the braita that says Rabbi Yehuda agreed on Yachol, it's also gone, because we're following the opinion that says he has his opinion, they have their opinion, and there was no crossover. Or there could be the middle braita where Rabbi Yehuda agreed and Rabbi Chachamim did not, and then there's a final one where neither one agreed. So we don't know what would be with Rabbi Yehuda in the final analysis, but it's not relevant because Rava was just saying that we follow the halakha, that which was brought down in our Mishnah. And if our Mishnah did not bother to tell you Hodu Chachamim, it must be that the Mishnah did not see this as being a point of agreement. Okay, we're going to end here.